They never expected it. 7 of America's biggest brands thought they could pressure a young African president into silence. But when Ibrahim Traoré made his move, the shockwaves didn't just hit Wall Street. They rattled the balance of power across the entire world. It began not in the streets of Ouagadougou, but in the tall glass towers of America, where 7 of the most powerful brands sat at the top of the global economy. They were giants in oil, mining, technology, and consumer goods, names so familiar that their logos were painted across billboards. From New York to Lagos, to them, Burkina Faso was small, weak, and easily influenced. When Ibrahim Traoré rose to power with bold speeches about African independence, the executives in their leather chairs laughed quietly. They had dealt with African leaders before, a few phone calls, a few offers, and most would bow, so the plan was set. Through diplomats and middlemen, letters arrived in the presidential palace, contracts demanding access to gold, cotton, land, and digital infrastructure. In exchange, they promised development aid, a polished phrase that really meant control, but behind the paper smiles was a clear threat: sign or face economic punishment. Soon whispers spread in Ouagadougou's markets and tea houses. Traders muttered that the economy might collapse if Traoré said no. Teachers feared salaries would stop. Families wondered how long they could survive without imported goods. Fear moved quietly from home to home, reminding people of the past when foreign powers dictated every step. In the city, tension thickened as if the air itself knew something was about to break. And yet, inside the palace, Traoré sat quietly with the letters spread across his desk. His advisors warned of consequences, his ministers urged caution, but his eyes were steady. The 7 brands believed they had cornered him, that his only choices were surrender or ruin. What they did not know was that the young president was already preparing a reply that would shake not just their profits, but the very foundations of their power. The reply came not with fanfare, but with silence that lasted for weeks, long enough for the 7 brands to grow impatient. They waited for Traoré's signature, certain he would fold under the weight of their threats. But when the young leader finally moved, it was not in the way they expected. One morning, the streets of Ouagadougou awoke to a shocking announcement broadcast across radios, televisions, and crackling loudspeakers in crowded markets. Ibrahim Traoré, standing at a simple wooden podium, declared that Burkina Faso would no longer allow foreign corporations to strip its resources. Without giving back to the people, every contract offered by the 7 brands was rejected, every demand thrown into the fire of history. Africa is not for sale, he said firmly, his voice echoing into homes and villages where farmers and mothers listened with disbelief. The words hit like thunder. Across the capital, young people erupted in cheers, chanting his name, waving flags, beating drums in celebration. But in faraway boardrooms, the news landed like a dagger. The executives leaned forward, their smiles gone, their eyes narrowed with rage. Billions of dollars they thought guaranteed were slipping from their grip. Calls lit up between Washington, Paris, and London, voices sharp with anger. How dare he refuse? Stock prices dipped, markets trembled, and suddenly, the small landlocked country they once dismissed was shaking the confidence of global giants. Yet the most shocking part was not his rejection, it was what came next. Traoré announced that instead of depending on foreign companies, Burkina Faso would form new partnerships with its own people, using its own hands, brains, and land to rise. The message was clear. Africa would no longer beg at the doors of power. It would build its own. The retaliation came swiftly, cloaked in the language of business, but sharp as any weapon. Within days of Traoré's announcement, the 7 brands launched a campaign designed to crush his defiance before it could spread. Bank accounts tied to Burkina Faso were frozen. Shipments of vital equipment were delayed at foreign ports, and rumors began to swirl through international media painting Traoré as reckless, unfit, even dangerous. In Washington, executives sat shoulder to shoulder with officials, drafting plans that blurred the line between corporate strategy and political warfare. In Paris and London, glossy newspapers ran headlines warning of economic collapse in Burkina Faso, while television pundits sneered that the young leader would soon be begging for foreign aid. Yet on the ground, the reality looked very different. Markets in Ouagadougou still buzzed with trade. Farmers still bent their backs over fields, and young people, fired up by Traoré's words, were working harder than ever to turn his vision into reality. Still, pressure mounted. Medicines meant for rural clinics suddenly cost twice as much. The price of fuel spiked overnight, leaving taxis idle and farmers stranded with unsold crops. Ordinary people felt the squeeze, and whispers of fear crept into crowded streets. What if the president had gone too far? But when reporters tried to corner him, Traore's answer was steady, even defiant. If they raise the prices of fuel, we will build solar energy. If they block our medicine, we will train more doctors. If they close their markets, we will feed ourselves. His words spread like wildfire, repeated in schools, markets, and homes. The 7 brands had expected Burkina Faso to bend under pressure, but instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous, a people who had tasted the power of self-belief and refused to let it go. What began as a struggle slowly turned into a quiet revolution. Faced with shortages and rising prices, the people of Burkina Faso did not collapse as the 7 brands predicted. Instead, they adapted. In the villages, farmers pooled their harvests, creating cooperatives that fed entire communities without relying on foreign imports. In the cities, young graduates launched small businesses, repairing equipment, making local medicines, and even designing homegrown technologies to replace what had been cut off. Across the country, a new spirit of unity took root, binding citizens together in ways no corporation could break. Women organized food markets that sold only locally grown produce. Musicians wrote songs praising independence, and children in schools raised their hands with pride when teachers spoke of building a future with their own hands. The shift was so strong that neighboring countries began sending delegations, curious to learn how a small landlocked nation was standing tall against global giants. Meanwhile, the executives of the 7 brands watched in disbelief as their tactics backfired. Instead of weakening Burkina Faso, their embargo had forced it to become stronger, more self-reliant, and more united than before. Boardrooms buzzed with frustration as profits dipped and shareholders demanded answers. How is this possible? One executive snapped. They were supposed to beg us, not teach others to resist. But the truth was undeniable. The more pressure they applied, the more Burkina Faso transformed into a symbol of African resilience. And as videos of Traore visiting farms, factories, and schools spread across social media, the story reached far beyond Africa. In Brazil, in India, in the Middle East, young people whispered about this leader who refused to bow. And a question began to rise everywhere. If Burkina Faso can stand, why not us? The final blow did not come from Burkina Faso alone, but from the world it had inspired. As weeks turned into months, Traore's defiance became a spark that lit fires across continents. In Africa, nations once silent about foreign dominance began renegotiating unfair contracts. Students in universities from Lagos to Nairobi wore t-shirts printed with the words, Africa is not for sale. In South America, leaders praised Burkina Faso's courage, and in Asia, trade ministers quietly opened new channels of cooperation that bypassed the 7 brands. Altogether, social media flooded with videos of ordinary Burkinabe farmers, engineers, and students, showing how they were building with their own hands what corporations once claimed only they could provide. The 7 brands, once untouchable, now faced boycotts, protests, and a loss of trust in markets they had long controlled. Investors grew nervous, their stocks falling as the image of their power cracked. Inside their boardrooms, panic replaced arrogance. What began as an attempt to punish one small country had turned into a global movement, questioning their dominance. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Traore stood before a massive crowd in the city square. Flags waved, drums thundered, and voices rose together in chants that shook the air. Looking out over the sea of faces, he spoke not of victory, but of responsibility. We have shown the world that freedom is possible. Now we must prove that we can build it with justice and with unity. The crowd roared, not just with pride, but with determination. For the first time in generations, they were no longer waiting for salvation from abroad. They were writing their own story, and as the sun set over Burkina Faso, the world understood that 7 global giants had been humbled, not by soldiers or weapons, but by the unstoppable force of a nation's will. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and share to spread the message. Subscribe to Faso Histories for more powerful untold stories that the world needs to hear.